The most important thing that happens to Juliet Nichols in Silo, Season 3, Episode 8, is not that she gets arrested. It's that she may have finally realized that getting arrested is exactly what she needed to happen. Because look at the timing. Juliet has spent the entire season trying to stay one step ahead of Judicial, trying to understand Safeguard, trying to uncover what Silo 1 is really doing, and now, just when she finally gets the information that could save Silo 18, she willingly walks straight into the hands of the people hunting her. That doesn't look like a victory. It looks like a catastrophic mistake, unless Juliet was never trying to escape, unless the real plan was to make Camille believe she had finally won. And if that's what happened, then the final scene of Episode 8 isn't showing us Juliet's defeat. It's showing us the moment Juliet turns herself into the perfect distraction. Because while Camille is celebrating the capture of the most dangerous person in the silo, everyone else may be getting closer to the one thing that could actually bring the entire system crashing down. The episode gives us just enough information to understand why Juliet can afford to make that sacrifice. Kennedy and Lucas are alive. They've made it to Silo 17, and that changes everything. The mission that looked completely destroyed in Episode 7 suddenly comes back to life, and Kennedy discovers something far more valuable than a weapon. He discovers how Silo 17 survived Safeguard. Inside that sealed room is Jimmy's mother, still in her cleaning suit, having sacrificed herself while trying to cap the Safeguard pipe. It's a horrifying discovery, but it's also the answer Juliet needed. Safeguard isn't some invisible force that simply arrives and kills everyone. It has infrastructure. It has a physical mechanism. And if that mechanism can be reached, it can potentially be stopped. That is the moment the entire strategy changes. Juliet no longer needs to destroy Judicial. She doesn't need to blow up the silo. She doesn't need to fight the system head-on. She now has a blueprint for doing something much more dangerous, making the system fail at the one thing it was designed to do. And this is where Bernard becomes incredibly important. Because Bernard has spent years believing that Silo 1 knows what it is doing. He believed that obedience was necessary because the alternative was chaos. He even killed Judge Meadows because he believed the rules were bigger than the individual people living inside the silo. But now Bernard is starting to understand the horrifying truth behind that logic. The rules aren't natural law. They aren't some divine commandment. Someone created them. Someone decided that an entire population could be poisoned if a certain condition was triggered. And someone sitting in Silo 1 has been given the authority to make that decision. Bernard finally starts asking the question he should have asked years ago. Why does Silo 1 get to decide who lives? And once he starts asking that question, he becomes useful to Juliet in a way he never could have been before. Because Bernard doesn't just know how the silo works. He understands the machinery of obedience. He knows what Silo 1 expects people to do. And now he's willing to use that knowledge against the system. That's why Juliet's next move matters so much. Bernard gives her the diagram showing how the silos are organized, with the different clusters branching from Silo 1. Juliet uses that information to figure out where Silo 18's corresponding safeguard system should be. She sends Shirley to investigate while the rest of the team prepares to act. On paper, this is the moment everything should finally start working. They have the information from Silo 17, they have Bernard, they have people willing to risk everything, and they have a real chance of capping the pipe before Safeguard can be activated against them. But then something goes wrong. Juliet realizes Shirley has been sent toward the wrong location. She rushes to correct the mistake, and suddenly the operation is compromised. Sandy radios in with the warning. Judicial is closing in. Emerson and the Raiders are moving. Camille is already anticipating what Juliet is trying to do. And this is the moment I think the episode wants us to look at differently. Because Juliet doesn't fight, she doesn't run, she doesn't try to create some elaborate escape. She surrenders. Why? That is the mystery at the center of Episode 8. Because Juliet knows exactly what Camille wants. Camille wants Juliet. She wants the person who has been challenging the silo's authority, exposing its secrets, and communicating with people outside the approved system. Camille has become obsessed with identifying Juliet's real intentions. So when Juliet gives herself up, she isn't simply handing Camille what she wants. She's giving Camille something that will consume all of her attention. Juliet becomes the biggest possible target, and that means everyone around her suddenly becomes less important. Think about what that accomplishes. If Juliet keeps running, Judicial has to search everywhere. They have to follow Shirley. They have to investigate Bernard. They have to watch the people moving toward the safeguard system. Every person involved becomes suspicious. But if Juliet is captured, everything becomes much simpler from Camille's perspective. She has the rebel leader. She has the person responsible for the conspiracy. She has the person who knows what Lucas and Kennedy are doing. She has the person who can supposedly explain everything, except she doesn't. And that could be the entire point. Juliet has always understood that information is more powerful than brute force. She spent years learning how the silos systems work, learning what Judicial hides, learning what the Pact doesn't explain, and learning what lies beneath the official story. Now she's using that same principle against Camille. She doesn't need to physically control the room if she can control what everyone believes is happening. And the moment she allows herself to become the story, everyone else gets a chance to disappear into the background. That makes her imprisonment alongside Robert Sims even more interesting, because Robert isn't just some random prisoner. He's another person who understands pieces of the system that Juliet needs, and Camille has already discovered that he knows more than he's willing to say about Juliet's intentions. So now, for the first time, Juliet and Sims are locked in the same place. The two people who have spent so much of the season operating on opposite sides of the silo's power structure are suddenly sitting behind the same door. Camille may believe she's putting two dangerous people under control, but she could actually be putting two sources of information in the same room. And that's where this gets dangerous. What happens if Juliet realizes she can use Sims from inside confinement? What happens if she learns something about Camille that she didn't know before? What happens if the very act of imprisoning her gives Juliet access to information she could never have reached from outside? Suddenly, the cell doesn't look quite so simple. And there is another reason Juliet's arrest could be exactly what she wanted. Camille is not just fighting Juliet anymore. She's fighting the possibility that the silo itself is waking up. Bernard is questioning Silo 1, Shirley is still active, Kennedy and Lucas are alive in Silo 17. Jimmy has become part of the larger story. People who were once isolated from each other are now communicating. The biggest weapon the silo authorities have always possessed was separation. Keep everyone at their own level. Keep every silo isolated. Keep information fragmented. Make sure nobody can see the whole machine. Juliet has spent the season breaking that isolation, and now she may be using her own arrest to continue doing it, because the most important discovery in episode 8 isn't actually about Juliet. It's about Silo 17. Jimmy's mother proves something that the people running these silos desperately don't want everyone to understand. Safeguard can be resisted. That changes the psychology of the entire rebellion. For years, the threat of Safeguard has been absolute. If the system decides a silo has failed, people die. There is no appeal, no negotiation, no escape. But if the pipe can be capped, then Safeguard stops being an unavoidable death sentence and becomes a machine that can be physically sabotaged. And once people understand that, the authority of Silo 1 becomes much weaker. Because what happens when people discover that the thing they've been terrified of their entire lives can actually be stopped? They stop obeying. That is why I think Bernard's decision to cap Silo 18's pipe is more important than it first appears. He's not simply trying to save his own silo, he's proposing a test. If they cap the pipe and Silo 1 reacts, they learn something. If Silo 1 contacts them, they learn something. If Silo 1 tries to explain why they cannot interfere, they learn something. Every possible outcome exposes another piece of the system. And that is exactly the kind of battle Juliet is good at fighting. She doesn't need to destroy Silo 1, she needs to make Silo 1 reveal itself. Because the moment Silo 1 has to respond, the people in Silo 18 can start asking questions that were previously impossible to ask. Why does Silo 1 control Safeguard? Who created the rules? Why are there 50 silos? And why does Bernard still believe there are 51? That last mystery becomes even more suspicious after the before-time scenes in Grey Goo. We finally get a much clearer explanation for why the silos were built. Stinson explains that nanotechnology became an existential threat. Humanity had created weapons capable of destroying civilization on a scale that made traditional warfare almost irrelevant. The cloud Charlotte flew into wasn't simply some random disaster. It was the result of a nanoweapon. The silos were built because the people behind the project believed civilization was approaching a point where the surface could no longer be trusted. That revelation is massive, but it creates an even darker question. Who decided that humanity should be preserved underground? Stenson? Thurman? The people funding the project? And if the purpose was simply to save humanity, Why build a system capable of killing everyone inside a silo? That's the contradiction that Silo keeps pushing toward. The silos were supposedly created to preserve human life, but they contain safeguard. They were supposedly designed to protect humanity from extinction, but they also contain mechanisms that can intentionally cause extinction on a massive scale. So what are the silos actually for? Maybe the original threat explains why the silos were built, but it doesn't explain why the system became what it is now. And that distinction could become incredibly important in the final episodes. Because Juliet isn't fighting the reason the silos exist anymore. She's fighting the people who decided what the silos should become. And that brings us back to her arrest. If Juliet planned this, then the ending isn't about whether she can escape Camille. It's about whether Camille has made the biggest strategic mistake of the entire season. Camille believes removing Juliet removes the threat. But Juliet has already distributed the information. Kennedy has the knowledge from Silo 17. Lucas knows what they discovered. Bernard understands the larger network. Shirley knows where the operation needs to go. And the people outside Judicial now have a mission that doesn't require Juliet standing beside them. That's the key. Juliet has made herself replaceable. And that may be the most intelligent thing she's done all season. Because a rebellion that depends entirely on one person can be destroyed by imprisoning that person. But a rebellion that has already spread the information doesn't work that way. You can lock Juliet in a cell, but you can't put the knowledge back inside her head. You can't make Kennedy forget what he discovered. You can't make Bernard believe the old story again. You can't undo the fact that Silo 17 survived. The information is already out, and that's what Camille may have completely failed to understand. She thinks the dangerous thing is Juliet Nichols. It isn't. The dangerous thing is what Juliet has taught everyone else. That the rules can be challenged. That safeguard can potentially be stopped. That Silo 1 isn't necessarily all-powerful, and that the people living underground don't have to accept the explanation they've been given for why they're there. So when Juliet sits inside that cell at the end of episode 8, don't look at her as a prisoner. Look at her as someone who just removed herself from the battlefield because she finally realized the battlefield no longer needs her. The real fight is happening somewhere else. Shirley and the others are moving toward the pipe. Bernard is waiting to see how Silo 1 responds. Kennedy and Lucas are carrying the secret from Silo 17, and Camille is staring directly at the one person she thinks she needs to defeat. That is why Juliet's arrest could be the most dangerous move she has made yet. Because if she surrendered on purpose, then Camille didn't capture Juliet. Juliet captured Camille's attention. And while Camille is busy believing she has finally won, the rest of Silo the 18th off may be preparing to do something that no one inside that silo has ever done before. They may be preparing to turn Safeguard off. And if they succeed, the question won't be whether Juliet can escape her cell. The question will be what Silo 1 does when it realizes that, for the first time, one of its silos has refused to die.